I'd now like to introduce Julie Reynolds, who's a CPA and currently works as the CFO of Via Capital, a holding company of 22 subsidiaries that span a wide spectrum of industries. Her efforts help companies providing anti-terrorism relief in the Middle East through education and self-defense. Other companies are assisting in the distressed real estate market here in the United States. While her undergraduate and first master's degrees were in the field of business, her true passions lie within the liberal arts. Julie and her fiance collect paintings from the Hudson River School, and one of their John Singer Sargent paintings is traveling with the Corcoran Gallery, Houston and London in 2010. They also collect exotic shells and most recently acquired their first Byzantine coin. Since 2007, they've been restoring an 1869 Italian home in the historic district of Annapolis, Maryland. So she has quite a commute. Julie enrolled in the MLA program to satisfy her affinity for the ancient world and during the process found a new passion for the Renaissance. Finished with the requirements for her MLA degree, but not willing to stop learning, she's currently talking to her mentors within the program about expanding her capstone through the Masters of Philosophy and Liberal Arts. Tonight, she'll present elements of that capstone, the LAOCOÖN, an interdisciplinary approach to analyze reception. It was read by Larry Silver and Victoria Gardner Coates. Julie.
Thank you, Chris. 2 years ago, I enrolled in the MLA program to study 3 interdisciplinary topics: art, history, and society. While working towards my degree, I collaborated with professors and students that shared my passions for ancient Greece and Rome and the revival of classicism during the Renaissance. We analyzed problems of interpreting the past, clouded by matters of space and time. One class was dedicated to an understanding of human sexuality from the ancient world into the modern era, another on the great monuments of the ancient past, and yet another on the adoption of classicism into the princely courts of Europe. Every semester I found myself intrigued by the diversity of course offerings, and ultimately I feel that I made the right decisions to tailor my graduate studies toward my individual goals. In the second semester of my studies, I was introduced to the ancient sculpture of LAOCOÖN. In subsequent courses, imagery of the marble statue kept reappearing in the works of artists such as Michelangelo, Titian, El Greco, and Rubens. Additionally, as I wandered through the galleries of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, I kept observing paintings that quoted the statue. I became interested in learning more about the cultural environment that enabled the LAOCOÖN to have such a powerful influence on the Renaissance, particularly in relation to the other antiquities unearthed during the same era. When it came time to choose a topic for my capstone project, I pursued the study of the prevalent societal, religious, cultural, philosophical, and artistic values that steered the changing reception of the LAOCOÖN during the eras of antiquity and the Renaissance, and the influence the statue has placed on subsequent generations. Today, I have been given an opportunity to share some of the results of my research and analysis with you. On January 14, 1506, in a vineyard on the Esquiline Hill, the statue of the LAOCOÖN became visible for the first time since antiquity. A local farmer found the LAOCOÖN in an almost pristine condition, and soon thereafter, experts were sent to authenticate the statue. Michelangelo was one of those experts. In my research, I analyzed the works of Michelangelo before and after the statue was excavated to assert the impact the statue made on the great master's works. This slide offers a visual summary of the sculptures that I explored in my capstone project. The statues on the upper half represent the works of Michelangelo completed before the LAOCOÖN was unearthed. For example, the Pietà was completed in 1500 and the David in 1503. The static posture and mild expression of these earlier sculptures is in direct contrast to the physical strength, emotional power, and expressive posture of his later works. In my capstone project, I investigated how the statue on the bottom left, known as the dying slave, is quoted from LAOCOÖN's younger son, who folds under the potency of the snake's venomous bite, while the statue on the bottom right, known as the rebellious slave, assumes a similar contorted torso and contrapposto of LAOCOÖN. These two statues were commissioned for Pope Julius II's tomb, and I will expand on the papacy's critical role in the appropriation of the LAOCOÖN in a few minutes. But first, I want to share my observations on the influence that the Laocoön placed on Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. In consideration of time limitations, I will only discuss my observations of the Ignudi. Please engage your imagination and envision walking around the Laocoön. On the top of the slide, I presented 2 images to get you started. While working for the Pope, Michelangelo had full access to the statue, and I argue that the Ignudi represent Michelangelo's study of the Laocoön in the round. The Ignudi presented on the bottom are not presented in this sequence on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but I have juxtaposed them on this slide to present a visual interpretation of my observations. What I envisioned with each painting was Michelangelo walking behind the Laocoön and observing the twisting of the torso, the flexing back muscles, the balance movement created by the positioning of his legs, and the leverage assumed in his feet. Not all of the Ignudi fit into the model of my observation, but as I've tried to demonstrate on this slide, the influence of the Laocoön offers a purpose for the poses assumed by the various Ignudi. Michelangelo was not the only artist profoundly affected by the Laocoön. During my research, I learned that throughout the 16th century, virtually every Renaissance artist honored the sculpture with poems, drawings, copies, and reproductions. Almost immediately upon its rediscovery, the Laocoön became the artistic standard of beauty and expression, which affected the canon of art during the Baroque era and beyond. To understand why, I had to turn to an interdisciplinary study of the Laocoön. In the 21st century, Laocoön is best known for warning the Trojans about Greeks bearing gifts. The goddess Minerva, who favored the Greeks during the Trojan War, summoned serpents to travel the seas to throttle the Trojan priest and his son as the interlopers for her planned victory. The Trojans did not heed to Laocoön's advice, pulled the wooden horse behind their fortress walls, and the kingdom of Troy fell, just as Minerva desired. Our modern understanding of the events of the Trojan War was not made popular until the 1st century of the Common Era. My analysis of the Laocoön's origin reconciled the ancient text of the Homeric era to the Virgilian era to suggest the statue's relevance to ancient Rome. The oldest written sources of the Laocoön legend date from the 8th century before the Common Era, although a tradition of oral history may have existed from the period of the Trojan War, assuming that Laocoön was a real historical figure. At the time of the Common Era, hygienists documented that Apollo had ordered the priest not to marry or procreate. When the god discovered that Laocoön disobeyed him, he sent serpents to kill the priest and his sons. Hygienists noticed that a limited group, the Phrygians, thought this happened because Laocoön had thrown his spear against the Trojan horse. After reconciling the ancient accounts, I argued that Laocoön, we are most familiar with, the character of Virgilian's Aeneid, was a product of artistic creativity. A propagandistic account of history aimed to glorify the descendants of Rome and legitimize the Julio-Claudian dynasty as the direct heirs to the heroes and gods of Troy. Virgil was a confidant of the Roman emperor, and the timing of the Aeneid and his modifications to the historical tales supports the second founding of Rome by Augustus. More prevalent than other ancient versions of the Trojan War, Virgil expressed Aeneas's heroism as he won it, desiring to stay and fight for Troy, but called away by fate to establish the city of Rome. Moreover, Virgil presented Trojans as relentless, courageous warriors who fell only when the chicanery of the gods intervened. During his discourse with Dido, Aeneas hailed Laocoön as the one Trojan who could have saved the city had his javelin drawn blood to reveal the cache of Greek soldiers hidden inside the decoy. The Aeneid does not depict the ancestors of Rome as careless fools who pulled the enemies behind the fortress walls, a story that could have prevailed in ancient Greece, but rather as pious citizens who disregarded the wise words of the Trojan priests because of the mendacious goddess Minerva. The Trojan priest's importance in ancient Rome culture was echoed in the 1st century CE when Pliny the Elder observed a visual representation of the Laocoön in Emperor Titus's palace. In my Capstone project, I argued that the veneration of the LAOCOÖN during the Renaissance was more attributable to the writings of Pliny than those of Homer, Virgil, or Hyginus. When the statue was rediscovered, LAOCOÖN was not identified as the defiant priest or the patriotic Trojan hero, but, and I quote, Giuliano de Sangallo, "This is the LAOCOÖN, which Pliny mentions." This is critical to the understanding of the reception of the LAOCOÖN during the Renaissance. The statue was not the first antiquity recovered, but it was the first documented ancient masterpiece to be uncovered in modern times. During the revival of classicism, finding the LAOCOÖN was a dream come true. When the statue was brought down from the Esquiline Hill through the streets of Rome, it was showered by rose petals by the throngs of people that lined the streets, and it was serenaded by the Sistine Chapel Choir. I'm not trying to imply that there was a single circumstance that made the unearthing of the LAOCOÖN a salient event in history. Rather, importance was derived from a confluence of propitious events involving the issues of state, church, and culture. During the 16th century and the revival of classicism, the presence of power, both secular and ecclesiastic, was communicated through the magnificence in palaces, churches, costume jewels, and even armies. The patronage of artistic culture was an essential part of courtly lifestyle. This culture venerated the LAOCOÖN and enabled its influence on artistic creation during the Renaissance and beyond. Upon assuming the papacy in 1503, Pope Julius II aspired to establish the papal city as Rome reborn. My research reviewed the confluence of the Pope's goals with the revival of classicism, the importance the Renaissance elite placed on displaying wealth, and the availability of talented artists. As I interpreted my analysis, I observed an unexpected trend between the reception of the statue in antiquity in the 16th century. At the onset of the Common Era, Virgil and Augustus transformed the Trojan priest into a symbol of courage, patriotism, and the dynastic rights of the Julio-Claudian clan and the second founding of Rome. The ancient statue of LAOCOÖN assumed a similar role in the 16th century under the Christian guise. Pope Julius II did not have abundant military or financial resources at his disposal, but he had the power of suggestion to initiate the third founding of Rome. The LAOCOÖN became an integral part of legitimatizing the papacy. These credentials were presented at the exact moment when the Catholic Church was firmly reestablishing its presence in Rome and claiming the dynastic rights to the first bishop through the recreation of St. Peter's Basilica. The pontiff's action also inspired great enthusiasm and urban pride among the Roman people. The LAOCOÖN became an important component to the Pope's plans for revitalization of Rome and the power of the Catholic Church. Before I conclude, I'd like to share one more influence of the LAOCOÖN, which can be observed right here in Philadelphia. We are blessed to have Sir Peter Paul Rubens' painting of Prometheus Bound at the PMA. It is a beautiful painting and can be appreciated simply on its artistic merits. During my studies in the MLA program, this painting was the topic of a semester term paper, and I learned that the painting is so much more than that. The artist painted Prometheus Bound for his private collection. Rubens' dedication to learning philosophy and antiquity provided him with a profound understanding of the aesthetics found in the dignified suffering of the LAOCOÖN. Extant correspondence proves that Rubens adopts the tenets of Neo-Stoicism in his private and public life. As a Neo-Stoic, Rubens believed that adversity has its utility, to improve one's character, to lead one to virtue, and to provide examples of punishment for the improvement of others. The Neo-Stoic believed that man should endure whatever pains were presented to him, willingly and without complaint. In the LAOCOÖN, Rubens found exemplary imagery to communicate his philosophical beliefs. Prometheus Bound uses the model of LAOCOÖN to depict the climatic scene of the ancient pagan myth, the reoccurring extraction of the Titan's liver as the divine punishment for stealing fire from Mount Olympus and bringing it to earth for the benefit of mankind. He incorporated the dignified emotions of the LAOCOÖN to portray the distortions that unbearable pain bring to the human body. He He's a real being, struggling against his attacker as the pain convulses his body. Nevertheless, Prometheus suffers with dignity. Rubens used the LAOCOÖN as a visual model to portraying pain and his neo-Stoic beliefs as a spiritual ideal of reason, freedom from emotions, patience and adversary, and a cheerful subjugation to God. Rubens depicted the Titan enduring inhumane suffering with understanding, acceptance, and virtue. His simultaneous depiction of tragic pity and fear conjures up the teachings of Aristotle, specifically, what we pity in others, we fear for ourselves. By way of conclusion, I want to share that the MLA experience has been a remarkable road to travel. Whenever I visit the PMA and gaze upon Rubens' painting of Prometheus Bound, I no longer just see the diurnal suffering of the ancient Titan. Because of my studies in the MLA program, I see Rubens as the great diplomat, philosopher, antiquarian, and artist, a man who respectfully suffered through the untimely deaths of his beloved brother, wife, and daughter, the political unrest of the Low Countries he desperately loved, and the age of religious wars that he honorably protested. In a similar vein, 2 years ago, I could not properly pronounce LAOCOÖN. Now, I'm preparing for a trip to Rome and Paris to appreciate the great statue of the ancient past and its influence during the Renaissance, some of which I shared with you today. The MLA program has afforded me with the opportunity to have a heightened experience in my travels to local museums through my pleasure readings and soon to my vacation to Europe. It has been a worthwhile investment to improve my understanding of the world around me and of myself. I wish that each of you have a similar opportunity during your lifetime, and someday, in the not-so-distant future, I hope to hear about your MLA experiences and the Capstone project that you have chosen to pursue.